AI, 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 AI.
Google has been an AI first company for a decade plus at this point and has some of the world's best AI research labs in house with Deepmind and Google Research. Those groups do an incredible job of producing groundbreaking, foundational new research that pushes sort of the computing industry forward. And a lot of that research ends up getting deployed into existing widely scaled Google products like Google Search and YouTube and Cloud and so on. It's also led to relatively recent and new products that have gotten launched, Gemini being a notable one. But there's this big open question in the industry. What are the net new products that will be enabled by these AI breakthroughs that don't currently exist, that will be sort of uniquely enabled by this generation of AI systems? And so the charter of our group is to help address that problem for Google.
A lot of people talk about artificial intelligence. A lot of people talk about corporate entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, or building something from 0 to 1. We've heard that term a lot. Today, I am incredibly happy to be speaking with Ani Mohan, who is a physical embodiment of what all of those terminologies actually mean. Ani was a product lead at Google. He has built a few startups within Google and was of late the product lead for AI Labs. And I have a lot of excitement about learning a lot from Ani about how he went about building some big things at Google. So let's tune in and hear what Ani has to say in today's episode of Building It Big. Hello everyone, thank you again for joining us in another episode of Building It Big. I have with me Ani Mohan, who was a product lead at Google AI Labs. Ani, welcome to the episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Shreyas.
Okay, so Ani, you have done a lot of great stuff at Google. At least that is what I know of, and I'm sure a lot of stuff outside of it as well. And today our conversation's around the AI Labs. So just to kick off, can you tell me what is Google AI Labs?
Yeah, Google AI Labs is a super unique organization whose charter is to help build new AI products for Google. So taking a step back, what does that mean? Google has been an AI first company for a decade plus at this point and has some of the world's best AI research labs in house with Deepmind and Google Research. And those groups do an incredible job of producing groundbreaking, foundational new research that pushes sort of the computing industry forward. And a lot of that research ends up getting deployed into existing widely scaled Google products like Google Search and YouTube and Cloud and so on. It's also led to relatively recent and new products that have gotten launched, Gemini being a notable one. But there's this big open question in the industry, which is, what are the net new products that will be enabled by these AI breakthroughs that don't currently exist, that will be sort of uniquely enabled by this generation of AI systems? And so the charter of our group is to help address that problem for Google. Sorry, I said our. I used to work there. I don't work there anymore. But that's the purpose of this group.
Yeah, but I think as technologists, we're always just very close to the mission, right? Like, so even when we say R, which is not Google's thing, I think we all deeply feel about it. So I get that sentiment for sure. So thanks, Ani, just for like sprinkling what exactly is AI Labs. You said a couple of things there which I wanted to like just go deeper into. So you mentioned Deepmind, which of course was an acquisition, and we know all the great stuff that they do with the AlphaGo and like the protein folding algorithms and stuff. Then you also mentioned Google Research. And just from my little time at Google as well, I know that we never thought of like AI as, oh, is this an AI product or not? Like intelligence was always sort of baked into our understanding, to our thought process and whatnot, right? So do you want to like just probably talk about what were the, say, swim lanes, or like what is the remit between Deepmind, Google Research, AI Labs? How do they work differently? How do they come together and like say help users?
So yeah, what's the difference between sort of things like AI, like Google Labs and Deepmind? So Deepmind and Google Research and these research organizations, their main charter is to essentially advance the frontier of science forward from a research perspective. So, what are the new algorithmic breakthroughs that are going to be needed for us to get to artificial general intelligence, for example? What are the foundational new models that will allow us to expand beyond just text generation and image generation, media generation, and expand into completely new frontiers that AI hasn't even taken us to yet? Robotics being one example of that, or the biological sciences, like you mentioned with AlphaFold. So the foundational sort of core research that's primarily done by folks with strongly academic backgrounds or folks with more of a research bent. Those are the types of people that Deepmind historically and kind of continues to attract. The purpose of the group that I was most recently part of, Labs, is to be more product centric. So it's interesting because labs, as well as sort of analogous groups probably in the other sort of major AI research labs across the industry, they have this sort of unique job of having to convert new cutting edge research into products and sort of sit in between questions like what new research capabilities are available now and what are the types of problems that users need to have solved by AI. And so it's this interesting line that you have to toe between thinking about what's technically possible based off of the research and what's grounded in sort of product and market reality today. And so the point of our group was to ultimately be customer centric and market centric, and spend a lot of time sort of looking at the industry and looking outside the building to figure out what new user problems we should be solving, but trying to do so with AI research as a differentiator.
Got it. So would it be a fair assumption here? So it's like a layer of osmosis, essentially, between what's groundbreaking in research and what is the untapped issue that a user has, right? How does that permeate on both sides, essentially?
That's right. And just on that point, I mean, a standard sort of piece of advice that you're given as a product builder is to lead with the problem, right? Like, make sure you're solving a problem, make sure you're not a solution in search of a problem, which, 99.999% of the cases, absolutely the approach you should be taking. But every now and then, maybe on the order of every decade, there are fundamentally new technical breakthroughs that enable a whole new category of solutions and products that previously couldn't exist. And so, the risk, of course, with that approach is that you end up being technology in search of a product. But every now and then you do invent something completely groundbreaking and new. I mean, previously this existed with the internet, with mobile, cloud. We and a lot of people in the industry believe this is going to exist with AI. But we need to make sure we're not just technology in search of a problem too. So it's a delicate line.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree with you. And the reason why I was like smirking a little bit is I think we're all guilty of that in some way, some capacity somewhere, right? But I think also that's sometimes the only way of, but how do I change the course of action of usual stuff, right? Like, so yes, it's a thin line between, say, I don't know, pragmatism and eccentricity a little bit, right?
That's right. I mean, take ChatGPT, for example, right? Which sort of kicked off this current generation of generative AI products. It was launched as a research demo. It was never meant to be a user-facing product, and now it's become the fastest-growing product in history.
And to be honest with you, right, I still find conversation as a medium or as an interface probably as a placeholder or like a stopgap sort of a solution of finding a lot of answers, right? Like, is conversation the right modality of, like, say, getting to ChatGPT or like the GPT beneath that, right? And I think that will evolve. But yeah, that's also a conversation.
No pun intended.
Perfect. Okay, so Ani, just focusing back in like your world, and again, myself and any listeners here would be very curious to know, what was your remit within the larger AI Labs organization?
Yeah. So AI Labs was sort of structured as an incubator, an early stage incubator. And so, it would take a portfolio approach to investing in a bunch of different project areas where, we thought there was promise for AI to make an impact in enabling new products. And so I worked on a couple different sort of specific things. One, I can't go into too much specific detail about what those products were, but one was broadly kind of in the no-code space. So, one of the things that these models are really, really good at is writing code. It's true kind of across the board with all these foundation models. What types of new software creation experiences might that enable is a question that one of my projects was asking. I was also working on some stuff in the gaming and entertainment space.
Got it. Got it. So that's good. And just from an AI labs perspective, do you recall any products which have come out of that space, which is broadly known to people, at least globally or at least in the US?
Yeah, probably the most widely adopted and released new product is NotebookLM, which is essentially rethinking what doing research online, like knowledge-based research, not fundamental computer science research, might look like in the age of an AI-powered tool. So how can you use AI to help you collate a bunch of different sources to figure out what those sources have in common, to extract insights, and ultimately to turn into a first draft of a knowledge product you might want to create. So potentially very useful for journalists, for students, academics, other user segments too.
Probably strategy consultants as well.
Exactly.
It's like gathering a lot of information,
Exactly.
making sense of it. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that's good for like what is the AI labs, and again, what do you do at what you did at the AI labs. You mentioned incubation hub, right? And one, you could say, synonym which comes to my mind, at least like from a process perspective, is always experiment, right? So you incubate something only when it's like in that experimental stage, and then you let it see the light of the world. Can you talk to me a little bit about like what the process is generally? Like, yes, there are issues existing in the market, but like how do you even go and figure out like what are these user problems that we can probably find a solution for?
Yeah, one of the challenges of sort of early stage product development, and this is broadly the case for any environment, not just specifically this AI lab, but anytime you're building something new, whether it's a different incubator, it's a pre-seed startup, whatever it might be, is that you're making a very high risk bet. Almost overwhelmingly the case, your idea, your hypothesis is not going to be proven to be true. And yet you proceed anyway. So what do you do? So, I think as much as possible, early stage incubation environments benefit from not having tightly held long-term plans. Having a point of view of what the future will look like, you need to have a thesis. Otherwise, you don't have a direction that you're marching in. To use one of the examples that I was talking about, you have this thesis that coding is going to fundamentally change because of these foundation models, because now you have an incredibly smart piece of software that can generate code that didn't previously exist. And so, over the next 5-10 years, the way software engineers and all of us will be writing code is going to look different. Okay, that's the thesis at a high level. Most people probably agree with that. But okay, what does that mean in terms of the specific product? It was and still is relatively unclear. And so a big part of early stage product development is to try to explore the space of ideas, the space of potential outcomes as efficiently and as quickly as possible. And almost thinking about it from the perspective of risk management, as much as you do, product development. I guess what I mean by that is, this broad thesis might be true that the way you write code is going to change, but there might be 100 different versions of a product that will enable that. And a priori, each of those 100 different versions might have relatively equal probability of coming true. How do you, as quickly as possible, identify the true shape of that probability distribution of which products are likely going to be the ones that win and which ones don't matter at all? It's an art of taking bets sort of quickly and intelligently, and more importantly, being very efficient about how you go from bet number one to bet number two. So ideally, your iteration speed is improving over time too. It was a little bit abstract, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, I think that space needs to be some bit of abstraction as well. Like needs some abstraction, right? Like, because the two things which I'm capturing in my brain here is, one is ambiguity, right? Like just kind of like being okay with that ambiguity is extremely important, and I don't know, like not being in love with your solutions too much too soon, right? So that's how you hop from like, okay, I test this, let's move on to the next thing because it's not working, right? Like, so that pivot is extremely critical here.
That's exactly right. I think, and sort of tied to that, having the right culture too that tolerates pivots. Having a culture that rewards not necessarily shipping a specific product, but iterating across the solution space, quickly, learnings, that type of thing.
Yeah. So just going back to the way you define this, right? Like, so your thesis, let's say in this scenario, is the way code is written will change, right? So how do you now? What's the next step, right? Like you come up with that thesis, and okay, there's a general consensus across the board, but now what?
Right. So, yeah, how do we go from that to a product? So, as I mentioned before, typically you start by only leading with kind of the user problem. Spending as much time as you can with potential target customers, identifying potential personas. In the case of this, it could be existing software engineers, or it could also be folks who have not written any software before, but now can. And so thinking about trade-offs like that, and even between those two buckets, there's tens of millions of software engineers out there in the world, so you probably got to go a little bit more narrow. And there's hundreds of millions, billions of people who've never written software before, so that's of course too broad as well. So progressively narrowing your user segment, spending as much time as you can with them, getting to know them, understanding what their problems are, so on and so forth. That's one piece of the puzzle. And maybe for most product categories, that's actually the only part that you should be focusing on. But I think uniquely kind of with AI and things that are trying to take advantage of the frontier, you also need to evaluate kind of the technical feasibility of what you're building too. So the other kind of big lens is trying to get a sense of, hey, what these models actually can and can't do today. In the case of code generation, what type of code can they write well? How reliable is it? That whole category of problem in the industry right now is called the evals problem, which you're probably familiar with, which essentially boils down to what can these models do and how reliable are they? All these different research labs have been putting out all sorts of quantitative benchmarks to demonstrate their models' performance and capabilities, and those are definitely very useful. But I think it's still an open question of what those qualitative benchmarks are too. How do you capture how a developer feels about using, Gemini versus GPT-4 versus Claude Opus versus Llama and so on and so forth? An open question, but something that teams have to do kind of for themselves right now. And so we spend a good chunk of our time also doing that. And so ideally our solution would be able to marry kind of the frontier of what these models are capable of at a high enough reliability rate with something that's solving a genuine user problem for a very specific segment, like one of the ones that I talked about.
Got it. I think one thing which was very interesting when you were talking about this, I was also actively thinking about like who is the user in some way, and I know that's like it's funny how much time people like you in the space would think about it, right? For most people, here is the user, but it's often not that simple, and people just like kind of don't value it as much, but it is a really hard problem to solve. So in this scenario, I mean, yes, software engineers are the users, but I would also say that probably people who are using the software that you're building is equally a user, right? It's like the same argument between if I'm building a house, am I building for the builder, or like say in the scenario of like a prefab house, I'm the person who's going to live in this house, so maybe I am the user, right? So that's probably the conundrum as well.
That was a tension, right, that we were facing all the time. I mean, and I think it was more broadly a tension that a lot of these AI products are dealing with. I mean, even take ChatGPT and all the similar products out there too. They have a wide number of users. I think ChatGPT reported they have 100 million MAUs.
Yeah.
This is just my hot take, but I think they and all the comparable products too are still pre-product market fit. I don't think it's 100% clear even to them. This is my guess. It's not like I have any inside information or anything, but it's not 100% clear to them who their target users are, who are the most retained users. I mean, AI is still very complicated to use for most people. Most people are not naturally prompt engineers. And so I think the industry is still trying to figure out like who exactly are these power users. I think many of them are probably software engineers and, knowledge workers looking for an edge, which is a very small slice of the world,
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because my party line answer to like what is product management is exactly this. It's like that communication layer which understands the right prompt engineering for the right user.
That's right.
And essentially that's what it is, right?
We're just prompt engineers at the end of the day. Yes.
Yes. Shh, let's not tell the models that yet. Okay. So this is good. Like just going back to the flow of like, okay, how is software built in the lab, right? So we have a thesis, we get the consensus, we find the user. That's great. Now, kind of just talking about, you mentioned like what can the model really do versus can't do. What is that process of figuring out? Like we've of course seen and heard of like these brilliant models which are available to Google but also to outside. What do you do in that scenario?
Right. How do you just evaluate what a frontier model is capable of?
Precisely. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting. So the first thing I'll say is I don't think there's a single human in the world who fully knows what these models are capable of. No single entity, which is a little bit unsettling, a little bit strange, but also very exciting. I'll give you one example. This is not about a Google model, it's about an Anthropic model, Claude Opus, that was released last month, I think. It seems to, be an industry leader in a bunch of benchmarks, or at least it was a few weeks ago. But one big critique of it, and a lot of the sort of, leading foundation models, Gemini 1.5, GPT-4, is that they can't reason. People throw out that broad statement. What does reasoning mean? It's complicated, of course, but people generally say, can't reason. That's going to happen in the next generation of models. But someone on Twitter actually put out a sort of competition saying, hey, actually, you know what? I think maybe these models can reason better than we think. We just haven't figured out the right prompt for it yet. And so what this person did is they put out a logic puzzle, which was something of the shape of like an advanced SAT problem or an LSAT problem, where it's like, A crossed with B leads to C, B crossed with C leads to D crossed with E, then what does A crossed with E lead to? Something like that,
Transitivity.
Something that, a fairly advanced LSAT taker could probably do, but, seemingly these models can't do. And said, hey, look, if someone comes up with a prompt for this, I'll give out $1,000, $10,000, something like that. And researchers have been trying to sort of demonstrate the capability of a model to do something like that for the last couple of years at smaller degrees of models, but also at the leading models. No one really made any progress. We thought, okay, this generation of models can't do it. Within 2 days, someone came up with a prompt to do it. Initially for GPT-4, I think, that got to 50% sort of accuracy, given a set of test examples. And then a day later, someone remixed that and got to 90% accuracy on Claude Opus. Insane. So in 3 days, we went from this is literally an unsolved reasoning problem. We're going to have to wait until 2 years from now for the next generation of models to, it's just a very complicated prompt. It wasn't the easiest prompt in the world, but it was a prompt that, is explainable, understandable, and works at 90% reliability. So I say that just to demonstrate not only are these models clearly capable of things that we don't understand, they're capable of potentially way more advanced things than we think they can do today. And it's just a question of poking and prodding them until we figure it out. The metaphor I like to use is we've essentially created alien intelligence, like for all intents and purposes. I don't know whether you call it artificial like AGI or whatever, forget those words, but we've created alien intelligence. Humans did it, of course, but alien intelligence now exists. And we're on this collective quest to poke and prod kind of what they're capable of. And people on Twitter are as good at figuring that out as the researchers at the most advanced AI labs. I say all that to say, I don't think we in labs had a particularly novel and insightful way of understanding capabilities compared to, frankly, anyone else on the planet who has access to these models. And so a lot of what we would do is, again, for these set of coding use cases, we would think about what would we want the models to be able to do, as a potential user. Maybe we wanted to generate a really slick, beautifully designed web application as a potential sort of V1 product. And to do that, the models have to do a bunch of things. They got to generate HTML, they got to generate CSS, they got to generate JavaScript. And so we would just, get working, like generating prompts saying, hey, can you, write CSS that looks like this? Can you make a website that looks like that? See what it puts out. Do the hard work of doing the evaluations, which is saying, okay, for 50 prompts, 100 prompts, what percentage of them were correct? For the ones that worked, cool, double down on those types of prompts. For the ones that don't, figure out why it wasn't working, try to adapt it. Well, a lot of it is grunt work, to be honest. A lot of it doesn't even require knowledge of AI research. It just requires rolling up your sleeves and poking and prodding until you can get the model to do something reliably.
Yeah. I think probably sometime when I read Java as a child, one concept that I read was garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that at play, right?
That's right.
It's like what you feed is what you get.
That's
Until
right.
you don't feed the right thing, you don't get the right thing, right?
That's right. And it's been what less than a year or about a year since the GPT-4 series models have even been released.
Yeah.
And that's really not that much time in human time. It feels like a long time in AI time. In human time, a year is almost nothing. And so, yes, we made further progress than we were at a year ago in terms of understanding what makes for a good prompt and what doesn't. But we still don't have amazing principles around this as an industry. And so, we're still trying to figure out what is garbage and what isn't.
What isn't, right? I think one thing which you said earlier on, when like say, ChatGPT today has circa 100 million monthly active users, right? And they still haven't found product market fit. I actually completely agree with you, even when it's probably a non-popular opinion, because there is so much of noise in the market with that, you could say that mass adoption, that there are so many misinformation guidelines or whatnot floating around, right? It's still not product market fit. There's of course like a large adoption, but would you really call that a fit yet is a massive question.
And I think I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think it's important to understand what does product market fit mean. But product market fit isn't a scale metric. It's more of a user love metric, right? Like, does the market love the product so much that they use it often? And so I'm, far more interested in metrics like retention, for example. What percentage of the people that signed up for ChatGPT on day 1 come back on day 7 or day 30 or what have you, versus the scale. The scale, I mean, you can get just from amazing brand awareness, from amazing marketing. Everyone in the world has probably heard, everyone who's online has probably heard of ChatGPT at this point. So it doesn't surprise me that 100 million people, out of the 3 billion people online have tried it. But what percentage of them come back? I don't know. I mean, OpenAI hasn't released this. But to their credit, none of the research labs have released this, so it's unclear.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to our modeling in terms of like, okay, we find a model, we do prompts, and like figure it out, right? So there's this iterative cycle, right? Like you test something, you go back, test again, whatever. What is that cycle like generally in labs?
I'd say it's, pretty similar to what it might be if you're a 2-person, 5-person startup, which is you have this hypothesis, you have this point which boils down to a hypothesis about what the model's capable of, and a hypothesis about who the user segment is. Then you got to test that hypothesis. You think about yourself as essentially a product research lab. You're testing your hypotheses through experiments. So you maybe build something really quickly and really scrappily that can serve those users. Maybe it's just a nice simple UI around a prompt. That's often what MVPs look like for AI products. You put it out in front of, a small number of representative people from that segment, and then you learn where you messed up, because you almost certainly messed up. You almost certainly made faulty assumptions. You almost certainly have not built a product with very high retention, because the probability that's very low. But hopefully you're able to make a little bit of incremental progress as to why that might be the case. And so typically that involves collecting feedback and insights from the market, whether that's quantitative, you look at their usage metrics on your analytics dashboards, or qualitative, you set up a bunch of calls with them, you talk to them, figure out, you observe them looking at the product, you see what's intuitive, you see what's not. And then all of that hopefully is data that can inform your next hypothesis. And then you just keep doing it over and over and over again until people love your product. Easier said than done. Simple, not easy. And how long it takes for that algorithm to converge onto a product that people love is an open question. Could be a week, it could be months, it could be years. But that's pretty much what you do.
So there's a scientific concept which comes to mind, right? Escape velocity. Like at what velocity do you think, like, okay, fine, now we are good enough to have achieved product market fit, and we can be either killed or triaged out of here, right? And also from your previous time with Area 120 within Google, I think you've dealt with that concept, right? So what is the makings of that, at least in labs?
It's definitely, I don't know if they were broadly agreed upon principles. Different teams kind of ran things differently. This is the case even in the industry, right? Quantifying product market fit, it's kind of notoriously tricky. I actually wrote a blog post on this. I have my personal methodology that I now use that our team was using, which we call the team testing time, which starts with try to find product market fit amongst us, as the core developers of it. That's hard to do for many products where you might not be representative of the user, but just in the case of this no-code kind of product, we were all technologists. We were potentially people who'd be using something like this. And I'm a PM. I'm not a professional software engineer. I have all these app ideas. Sure, maybe I'll be using a product like that. And so it took us a while to get here, but the practice that we were running was get together as a team every day for like 30 minutes and just like use the product. As simple as that. And you know, the product would let you like make software. So you'd have like an actual artifact at the end of the thing. But then we'd ask ourselves a question, like, are we excited enough about what we made that we would feel comfortable and excited to share it with someone else who was not part of our team? And if so, okay, interesting. Maybe we were onto something. The tool was good enough to make something that could go viral, you know? But if not, like, how could we expect our users to make something that they would feel excited enough to share with others? That's a high bar, I would say. That's not the only way of measuring product market fit, because we were trying to get to the K factor of the product, and that's only one way to grow and so on. But I think it's kind of illustrative, right? I mean, it sort of speaks to this notion of pride. Like, have you made something that you're proud of? If you have, you probably like, you know, are on the path to product market fit. If not, then like, you're probably not. So that's one way, maybe try to tease at it.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition. I think I think of it, you know, in a similar fashion around concentric circles. Would you tell your mom? Would you brag about this on a date? Would you tell the whole wide world, kind of stuff, right? Like that's the concentric circles analogy that I have, but I think it's the same thing basically.
Would you brag about this on the date? Is a very good one. Exactly. We should just do that. That's better.
Yeah,
that's the best metric ever.
That's not the team testing, but yeah. Okay, so that's again good. Now, so we spoke about the iterative process and everything. Ani, we touched briefly about the pivot and the culture bit, right? Because I think that is extremely critical. Can you talk about so how do you know that, oh, we should now pivot? And how do you get everybody excited, especially as a product manager, that, oh, we need to pivot and this is the pivot, right? Because those are extremely important in my opinion. But yeah, what do you think?
Extremely important and very tricky, and often a place where teams get drilled. I think the number one reason for seed stage startups failing is not that they run out of funding. It's actually that the co-founders like break up and disagree, and the team falls apart, often because of this. So it's clearly hard, probably extremely hard. A few things that I think help. One is having as much as possible a truth-seeking culture. So a team and a culture that's trying to build something successful versus being wedded to a specific solution or a product. You mentioned that before too. And that means from day one, setting that tone. Like day one, telling yourself and literally everyone that signs up for the team, whether it's team members, it's investors, it's stakeholders, hey, the purpose of our team is to ultimately solve this problem. It's not to ship this specific product. We are likely wrong. Saying that from day one. And just reiterating that message over and over and over again. So that inevitably when you are wrong, nobody's surprised. You know, it's just a continuation of what you've been saying every day. So I think that's one. And I think that's one example of what it means to have a truth-seeking culture, is just acknowledging the truth, you know, from day one. I think another, and this one's really tricky, and I personally have not seen a great solution to this, but it's a question I'm really interested in, which is how do you incentivize truth-seeking too amongst the team and the culture? Publicly praising, you know, when people change their mind, you know, is one example, versus criticizing. Another is having people personally rewarded in some ways for pivoting and seeking the truth. I think the way that pre-seed, you know, seed stage companies do this is through startup equity. You know, everyone's equity is worth nothing until one day it is. That's an incredibly powerful incentive alignment tool, right? To get people to not be too wedded to their sacred cows and to actually pivot into finding things that are ideally solving user problems. That's a more challenging tool for big companies who maybe don't have that instrument. So, I think it's a genuinely difficult problem without obviously clear solutions.
Yeah, I think, and I just want to like hammer this point as well, right? Like what you're mentioning around culture, because the extremes could be penalizing as well. Like say the same thing around like, hey, if you pivot, you actually get a pat on the back versus you get criticized in a town square of sorts, right? Either of those extremes are just bad, because if you get too much of like goodwill for that, then people are wrongly incentivized to like just keep pivoting. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm
That's a
gonna
really
get
good
something.
point.
Yeah,
That's a really good point. Yeah. And maybe that actually speaks to a meta point, which is another one too, which is just be balanced. You know, I think finding product market fit and building something new is a marathon. I mean, it's trite, but it's truly a marathon. It's not a sprint. And the most important thing to run a marathon, I know you're a marathoner, is to have the right mindset. You know, right? That this thing's going to take a really long time. It's a slog. But don't get too obsessed with the peaks and valleys mentally. So how do you bring that, you know, to your product building culture? Like, even if you're on the right track, even if, you know, you seem to see some exciting quotes from users, you still have probably 40 iterations to go before you're quote unquote done. And you're never done. So
you're never done.
Just be balanced, you know?
Yeah. it just brings back so many memories for me, so I'm like just constantly smiling on my face. I'm like, yes. I have seen this, you know.
Mile 18 of the marathon.
It's like wild validations. Okay, so I think we spoke about pivot, Ani, but you've of course like launched few things in labs, at least like iterated them, even if like not gotten to 100 million yet. Someday we will. What were some like great eureka moments from that time, right? Like say even on the no code thing or any other projects, like the game development projects that you were part of, something which you launched, even the tiniest of things, and a user went like, oh snap, this can do this, I'm just loving it, right? Anything of that sort?
Yeah, before I was in labs, I was in this incubator called Area 120, which is analogous to labs, but not just about AI, kind of about any.
And also in Google.
Also in Google, yeah. Essentially meant to be kind of a pre-stage, seed-stage incubator within Google. And I worked on a couple different things there. I worked on something in personal finance, didn't work out. Worked on something in gaming, didn't work out. And spent 5 years on the gaming project. And I think it was 2.5 years we're looking for product market fit. Like we probably tried like 10 different ideas before ultimately getting to the thing that worked. And our initial idea was this pretty complicated product, inspired by this app called HQ Trivia, which, for folks who don't know, was a very novel product at the time. This was popular in late 2017, early 2018. It was essentially a mix of a game show and a game. And so the basic idea was, you know, how do you take a format like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you know, but allow anyone and everyone to participate and play and win a cash prize every night. So it was, I think, ahead of its time, still kind of ahead of its time. It became a viral phenomenon, you know, for like 6 months. And I was really inspired by it because it was really cool seeing, you know, every day at the same time when I was walking down the streets in San Francisco at the time, people would stop whatever it is that they would do in public, you know, on the street corner, huddle around with other strangers and like play this game. It was just a crazy new user behavior. And I love consumer psychology and the user behaviors. And my co-founder, who's a good friend of mine, is a big gamer. And so he just liked it because it was a very interesting new game. And so I felt like it was at the intersection of our two interests. So anyway, our initial idea that we got funded for was something like HQ, but a different game every day. Because our hypothesis was that people would get bored of the same game every day. Did not work. You know, we worked on that for 3 months. Yeah, some of our initial users liked it, but it was just very hard to explain the product. It was very hard to grow. And yeah, I mean, we just struggled to get it off the ground. So that was product number one. And then ultimately, like I said, we got to like 10 iterations before finding the thing that worked, which, you know, we worked together on this. It was a casual gaming platform for emerging markets. It's called Game Snacks. Very simple, lightweight, web-based games that people in India and Nigeria and Brazil and Indonesia and emerging markets were primarily playing. Much simpler product than what our initial product was. And from that first product to the 10th product was essentially a process of getting progressively simpler and simpler and simpler. And so that was a really remarkable kind of learning for me, which is, you know, I've loved technology since I was a little kid. Like I always have all these crazy new product ideas, probably always will. But that doesn't mean people like it, you know? And often the things that people like and the things that resonate are the things that are super simple. And so just remembering that, especially in the consumer space, but probably, you know, in terms of any kind of widely adopted product, the simpler the better often. Like people don't have time to get to know your product, you know, especially in today's world, 2024, there's a million things competing for their attention. How do you break through the noise as quickly as possible? And simplicity always helps. I'll give you another example. I talked about retention being
Yeah.
one of the key metrics you look for product market fit. And there's a period, I think this was like, iteration number 8 of the product. So a couple iterations before we got to the thing that ultimately worked with Game Snacks. And I remember we had a version of our web, it was a web application. We had a web application that was, a bunch of these simple, lightweight kind of web-based games, but with, social features around it where, a bunch of people could be playing the same game at the same time, see other people sort of score in real time, and then there'd be like a leaderboard at the end of it. And it was pretty cool and like kind of complicated because we had to like synchronize everyone's game state, and was sort of dependent on the quality of your internet connection, which wasn't always the most reliable thing in a country like India. But we thought it was a really cool product, and like some of our users who were using it, we had hundreds, maybe thousands of users who were like actually using that pretty often. We're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, what's going on? But why can't we grow it? And I think it was my co-founder, he had this idea, which is like, wait a minute, like, why do we have all this complicated, bells and whistles around it, like this real-time leaderboard, all this stuff, if we're targeting people who are on 2G and 3G primarily in India? Like, what if we built a version of the site where we just literally got rid of all of that, had like literally 5 games on it. I think we had 30 or 40 games at the time with this, but literally take 5 games, but we really focus on them loading really, really quickly on like 2G and 3G, like load under like 300 milliseconds type thing. And my reaction was like, oh my god, that's such a boring product. That's so simple. Why would we already made this thing so simple. Why would we get rid of social features? We know that people love social features in gaming. Like everyone knows this. But he's a pretty strongly minded guy, great engineer. He's like, I'm just gonna build this. It's like, all right. So he built it, launched it, literally the simplest website in the world. Well, I mean, it requires a fair amount of technical complexity because it's got to load quickly, but from a product perspective, super simple. Put it out there, higher retention than anything we'd seen. And both of us were like, wait a minute, like what? This is the simplest thing that we've built out of anything that we've tried so far, and yet it's got higher retention, proofs in the numbers. And so that was kind of a wake-up call to us where it's like, wow, like keep it simple. The goal is to get to high retention. It's not to build the most amazing whiz-bang product. That was a eureka moment. It's actually, as I'm saying this out loud, I had thought about that in a couple of years. It's a good reminder, keep it simple.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, when you talk to users, right? Like, we often forget that.
Totally.
Just by virtue of habit, right?
Totally.
Like,
Speed,
I agree.
right? Speed is the killer feature,
Yeah. I think, and I resonate with that a lot because a lot of people are just always, oh, it works, and those 2 words, like it works, is actually often all that you need and all that people care about,
Totally.
Yeah. Cool. So, pretty much my last question to you, Ani, on this one. There is so much buzz around AI and Gen AI and ML and all those things, right? Which I don't know if many people understand. I clearly do not, to be very honest with you. But a lot of people are definitely trying to like pursue a career in that, or at least those who are still in their budding career stages, trying to figure out like what should we do and what should we not do, whatnot, right? Any piece of advice you have just for like builders, like could be PM, Eng, UX, doesn't matter, but like what should they be like really mindful of or like considering right now in this whole AI boom bust cycle that we'll see?
Yeah, it's a good question. AI is clearly everywhere, right? In the tech world, but also even outside the tech world. Our governments are thinking about it, policy institutions are thinking about it. Everyone's got an opinion on it. Some things to keep in mind. So I think one, AI over the last kind of 1 or 2 years has definitely been crossing the chasm from research to product, which is really exciting, and presents a huge opportunity to people who don't have an AI background, but have, product engineering backgrounds. The industry needs way more of this. Like some of these concepts that we're talking about, like keep it simple, like speed is the killer feature, like focus on retention. These are principles that I think a lot of PMs are aware of, but are still generally kind of new in the AI industry. So I think it just presents a big opportunity for people with, a strong product and engineering and builder kind of background and skill set. So that's one, is just kind of lean into what you're already good at because the industry needs it. Like you don't need to go and like read a bunch of AI papers and become like a top-notch AI researcher to contribute in a meaningful way, I would say is one thing. So just start building, start prompting. It's as simple as that. I'd say another thing though is remember it's a long game. Like I think these models are really good and are probably going to get better, I think, just with using the current techniques of throwing more data at them, throwing more compute at them. No crazy new architecture breakthroughs beyond kind of what the transformer is today. It seems like we still have some headroom to go. I'm not an AI researcher, but this is from everything I've read, people I've talked to, just my belief too. But it's possible research, might stall, in the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. And at that point, a lot of people will probably leave the industry. A lot of capital might go away. Governments might stop paying attention. But that doesn't mean AI is going away, in our lifetime anytime soon. I transitioned to AI only a year ago when I joined sort of this incubator. My background before was mainly in consumer product development. But it's the most interesting thing that I've ever worked on. And it's intellectually fascinating in a way that I love. And I want to continue working on it, I think, for my whole career. And so if I'm serious about that, it means I got to stick around even when the hype cycle goes away, right? Which it will in 2, 5, 10 years, who knows? And so part of it is thinking about your motivation too. Why do you want to work on AI? Is it because it's the new crypto, quote unquote? Or is it because of other reasons? And time sizing your bets appropriately. If you do want to work on it, for a quick short-term thing, okay, that's fine. But maybe it changes the types of problems and products you work on compared to, you don't want to work on it for 10, 20 years.
Yeah. I think extremely important point there around the research to product sort of chasm crossing, right? What people don't understand is when they look at a product, which is especially in the hands of consumers, they expect fast iteration. Oh, I downloaded an app, it's got a new update 3 weeks later, there's a bug fix, now there's a new UI, blah blah blah, right? So people are like, oh, that's the rate at which technology changes. Yes, but not always on the research end. It takes a while till a transformer comes and till a transformer sees another exponential growth from there, right? It's not always 6 months and you're in.
That's right.
But I think that's where the consumer, you could say, I don't know, they're just very consumers usually do not have enough patience, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
That's right.
And that's what kills the boom and ends up in a bust, at least in this scenario.
I would also say, we as product builders who come to the industry over the last 10 years have kind of been spoiled too by one of the best times ever to build new products.
Yeah.
Cloud made, the cost of compute go to zero. So it cost you pretty much nothing to launch an idea and to distribute it to users. Capital was super cheap. Interest rates were zero around the Western world. And everyone was on, started coming online. And so you sort of got addicted to this loop of coming up, hackathons became a thing in the last 10 years. You had an idea, it cost you $0 to launch it, to test it with users, to grow it, and you could conceivably build a viral app. They got to 1 million users that cost you pretty much $0 in a weekend. That's insane. That's not how building products were before. And I think crucially are not what they're right now in the age of AI. Because AI is expensive, compute is no longer free. AI is still slow right now. So a lot of consumers won't put up with it, And so I think the rules of what software product development are changing a little bit with AI products from a financial perspective, from a product iteration perspective, and so on. And so you need to kind of update your beliefs too.
Yeah. I think my only big worry, again, from a pure technology point of view, is will it get a bad rep, say the VR market has had? Because you show people these big visions and fancy ideas and future, and then you don't deliver on it soon enough because you just can't, right? There's absolute time that it takes to build that thing, and the capital as well.
It's fair. Time will tell.
Yeah. Okay, great. Ani, that's all for today's conversation that we wanted to have. There's so much of insight and good stuff that I've captured. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody who's going to watch this will say the same. Thanks again for your time, and I know you are moving on to a new chapter from Google, so congratulations on that, and good luck.
Cool. Thank you so much.
So that was my conversation with Ani Mohan. Ani is a product lead at Google AI Labs. 3 things important that Ani shared, I'd just like to give you as a final takeaway. Number 1, when you're building something which is new, something like a seed stage startup, which is still trying to figure out what exactly is the product or what exactly is the solution to the problem. Make sure that you're building the right culture. That culture needs to be rewarding. The incentives should be aligned with people trying as fast and as many things to make sure that the user problem is being solved. So don't be too attached to the product or the solution just yet, but the problem and like whether or not you're providing value to the user. Secondly, pivoting is extremely important. Knowing when to pivot is critical. So again, going back to the previous point, do not be too attached to the solution, because you may have to pivot, and you should be absolutely okay to scrap whatever you had and move on to the next thing, which might actually be solving the core user problem. And third thing, ambiguity. So this is going to be a stage of extreme ambiguity. So finding comfort in that level of ambiguity is again a skill set that one can develop and one needs to develop when you're trying to build something as new as, say, an AI research lab for that matter. So that was the conversation with Ani. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please subscribe, like, share, leave comments, and tell me if you would like to hear from more such great leaders and great developers who are building it big. Thank you again.